Hello and welcome to the Gaggle Wobble Challenge, and if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely. With me today, of course, is co-founder of the Gaggle, Peter Lavelle. So, Peter, in an earlier podcast, we spoke about the lunacy prevailing in Europe as they whip up war fever among the public in order to justify massive military expenditures apropos of nothing. But the man who has gone further than anyone else in this artificially induced hysteria is our friend, French President Emmanuel Macron. So he on Wednesday, he went on television and delivered an extraordinary address to the French people, denouncing Russia in the most vituperative terms and urging them really to prepare really for war. And so extraordinary was this. I think it's worth just taking a look at some of the things that he said there. And then maybe we can then the Russians reacted very vigorously to this speech. But if you just look at what he's saying here, it is kind of amazing. The transformation that has taken place in Macron, where he used to be not an unreasonable person. So let me just find this.
I think you passed it.
Yeah, I think no. Oh, yeah, you're right. I passed it.
There you go. There,
Yeah,
there it is. 19.
That's.
Oh no,
I think
21.
This this
21.
one exactly. Yes, that's right. So this is his address to the French, and here we have this. It says United States, our ally, has changed its position on the war, is less supportive of Ukraine, is leaving doubts about what will happen next. At the same time, the same United States intends to impose customs tariff on products coming from Europe. And then the war in Ukraine has been going on for more than 3 years now. From the very first day, we decided to support Ukraine and to impose sanctions on Russia, and we did the right thing because not only the Ukrainian people are fighting courageously for their freedom, but also our security is under threat. So as we said before, the Europeans always slip this in, and then you're always left puzzled because, well, if your security is under threat, why haven't you done more about it? Why are you just staying in the background? And then, indeed, if a country can invade its neighbor in Europe with impunity, then no one can be sure of anything, and it is the law of the strongest that applies, and peace can no longer be guaranteed on our continent. History has taught us this. But how do how do you guarantee peace by furthering war? I mean, again, this we're so used to this kind of peace is war rhetoric coming from the Europeans that it's like, okay, so peace is guaranteed by continuing a war. And then beyond Ukraine,
there's nothing that the war should come to an end ever.
That never exactly. That's the line coming from Europe. Beyond Ukraine, the Russian threat is there and affects the countries of Europe, affects us. Russia has already turned the Ukrainian conflict into a global conflict.
No, it's Europe that did that.
Europe, yeah.
And the Americans did that. They threatened, cajoled, blackmailed, sanctioned. Yes. No, they turned it into a global. Most of the world wants to have nothing to do with this.
That's right. That's right. It has mobilized North Korean soldiers and Iranian equipment on our continent while helping these countries to arm themselves further. But again, when he says something like that, you think, well, okay, they got North Korean soldiers, Iranian equipment. Now, there have been, Europeans have been going there as mercenaries or whatever, fighting in Ukraine. And the amount of weaponry, that you've been pouring, but whatever the Iranians sent just pales in comparison with the amount that you have sent.
For
So
a
you're
decade.
really, yeah, for a decade,
For a decade.
yeah, you're going to complain about a few drones from Iran, where you can send, I don't know, all of that vast equipment, much of it coming from the United States, which is way over across the ocean. President Putin's Russia violates our borders to assassinate opponents. Oh, we're back on the assassination thing. Assassinate opponents, manipulates elections in Romania and Moldova, and
Oh, I
I
thought
love
the
that one.
European Union did that.
I just love that. Really? Now you basically stole an election from the leading presidential candidate. You just stole it. You canceled an election. Moldova, you disenfranchised hundreds of thousands of Moldovans who are living in Russia, and you're going to accuse Russia of manipulating elections. It organizes digital attacks on our hospitals to block their operation. Why would Russia order digital attacks on hospitals? I mean, what strategic advantages do you gain by attacking hospitals? Um, um, Russia tries to manipulate our opinions with lies spread on social networks.
Okay. What
And
was USAID doing the whole time?
exactly. And deep down, it tests our limit, and it does it in the air, at sea, in space, and behind our screens. So the Russians are everywhere. That's basically the Russians are under the bed, in the bed, um, at the dinner table, on television. They're everywhere. I mean, I can't see them myself, but maybe they're there. Um, and then this aggressiveness does not seem to know any borders. And at the same time, Russia continues to rearm, spending more than 40% of its budget for this purpose. By 2030, it plans to further increase its army to have 300,000 additional soldiers, and so on. Then again, you think, okay, now NATO comprises 32 member states. When you add up how much they all spend on their militaries, it dwarfs anything Russia spends. When you add up all of the arms and equipment that's at the disposal of the 32 member states of NATO, dwarfs anything Russia has. And you're talking about these numbers as to what Russia has. Who can believe in this context that Russia will stop at Ukraine? No. Russia has become, at the same time as I speak to you and for the years to come, a threat to France and to Europe.
Okay, so that there's no negotiations, there's no interaction, no political intercourse here. You've decided you're at war.
Right. But do you know how does it get to be a threat to France? I mean, is this because of
Uh,
these assassinations of somebody, whoever's being assassinated? I don't know, but it's a threat to France. I mean, it doesn't really explain how it's a threat to France.
and how assassinations, which I'm not particularly clear what he's talking about.
No, I mean, is he talking about the Skripals,
Yeah, okay.
are we still talking about that guy, that CEO of Rheinmetall, who apparently
Well, that wasn't in France,
that wasn't in France, who apparently
and when it
yeah.
comes to a CEO, and he disappeared under mysterious circumstances, as far as I'm aware. I don't want to go into it because it's pure speculation. Then you get a new CEO. How
You can use,
what
and it's
changes?
no, and these. I mean, there've been various Russians who have died over the years, as often happens, because people do die. I mean, that's kind of part of the human condition. People die, but every time a Russian dies, it's assumed that he was assassinated by the Russian government. But even if that's the case,
Well,
but let me just say, even if that's the case, and the Russian government assassinates people such as Berezovsky or whatever. Let's say that's true. Let's say the Russian government did that. How is that a threat to anybody else? I mean, that's an intramural. I mean, Indian government goes around assassinating its political opponents, but nobody says, well, India is a threat to Canada or India is a threat to the United States. I mean, it's not very nice to go around assassinating your political opponents, but how is that a threat to you? And since nobody takes India to be a threat, then in the worst case scenario, and I'm not saying that Russia did kill Berezovsky or whatever, but in the worst case scenario, it still isn't a threat to France.
Also, everyone, look at the extremes that are being voiced by the French president here. Look at that. That's a meaty paragraph.
Right,
Every single line is an accusation.
right.
Well, let's turn it inside out. He's he's desperately trying to convince the French public that Russia is a threat. I mean, if it was a real threat, you would know it, okay?
You would know it
But
exactly.
you have to
Right.
you have to like beat a drum.
Yeah,
You have to shout at the top of your voice. They're a
right.
threat. They're a threat
That's right.
because it's not apparent to anyone except for the
No,
French president.
no, that's exactly that's what's so pernicious about everything that's going on in Europe is this fake, phony, fraudulent whipping up of hysteria about this Russian threat because nobody sees it. You look around. Well, the Russians are everywhere. Where? I don't see any Russians. Um, but that's right. And so I regret this very deeply. And I'm convinced that in the long term, peace will be made on our continent with a Russia that has become peaceful and calm again. But that situation that I'm describing to you is that one, and we must deal with it. So
Well,
calm, peaceful, and calm.
yeah, I mean, peaceful. Thank you. You picked up on the same thing. Peaceful and calm again. So
That's right.
that's
That's,
easy to read
that's right. Yep.
as regime change.
That's right. That's it. And then he says, faced with this world of dangers, remaining spectators would be madness. So remaining spectators. So we're not a party to the conflict, but we're not spectators. Okay. It is a question without further delay of making decisions for Ukraine and for the security of the French, for the security of Europeans.
Well, so I guess it was only just 15 minutes ago. French security and Ukrainian security are synonymous, right?
Right, right,
Okay.
right. For Ukraine first, all initiatives that help peace are going in the right direction, and I want to welcome them this evening.
But everything you're saying is against peace.
Exactly. That's why it's so headache inducing when you listen, whether it's him, or Ursula von der Leyen or Annalena Baerbock. It's this bizarre logic that somehow we're furthering peace by increasing our military aid to Ukraine. We're furthering peace by ensuring there are boots on the ground and aircraft in the air in Ukraine. I mean, they keep saying this, and it flies in the face of any common sense. But by dint of repetition, people start to accept this kind of nonsense. We must continue to help the Ukrainians resist until they can negotiate with Russia a solid peace for themselves. So again, yeah, we have to resist until they can negotiate a solid peace. We need to strengthen their place at the negotiating table.
Yeah, but they tried to do that
They've been trying all
in
3 years.
in the spring of 2022.
Right. But for 3 years, they've been saying the same thing. We have to keep arming Ukraine in order to strengthen their negotiating hand. That is why the path to peace cannot involve abandoning Ukraine. Quite the contrary, peace cannot be concluded at any price and under Russian diktat. Peace cannot be the capitulation of Ukraine. It cannot be its collapse, nor can it result in a ceasefire that would be too fragile. And why? Because here too we have experience from the past. We cannot forget that Russia began to invade Ukraine in 2014, that we then negotiated a ceasefire in Minsk, and that the same Russia did not respect the ceasefire, and that we were not able to maintain them due to the lack of solid guarantees. Today
Well,
we
that's
can no
just a
longer.
bald-faced
Of course,
lie.
it's a bold-faced lie. But notice again, he is doing this in order to sabotage anything at all that the Trump administration might have up its sleeve. He's going to basically, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure that the Trump will fail. I mean that's all that he's saying. That we can't involve, we can't abandon Ukraine. Russian diktat. Peace cannot be the capitulation of Ukraine. All of this is to say we're going to do whatever we can to ensure the failure of any peace negotiations.
And it ends here. Today, we can no longer take Russia at its word. Why would Russia take Macron's word? Why?
Absolutely, absolutely,
After this spectacle?
exactly. And then Ukraine has the right to peace and security for itself, and it is in our interest, blah, blah. It is in this sense, listen, it is in this sense that we are working with our British, German friends and several other European countries. This is why you saw me in recent weeks gathering several of them in Paris, going to meet them in London. And
Well, he's
once
just been having a hell of a good time.
we're having, yes, 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 that's right. There have been a number of these meetings. There's a lot of meetings going on. There was a meeting in France, and there was a meeting in London, and there was a meeting in Brussels. They're doing a lot of meetings. Once peace is signed, so that Ukraine is not invaded again in Russia, we must prepare for it. This will certainly involve supporting the Ukrainian army over the long term.
Okay,
It
I'm sorry to interrupt, George. Once peace is signed, how are we going to get there?
Exactly. That's the important. That's the crucial point. What peace? What are going to be? They just take this for granted. Oh well, once peace is signed, that's not important. But what's important is we got to keep arming Ukraine. But what's the peace? I mean, that's the only question that you ask. But they deliberately, they don't want to talk about that. They want to just sabotage any possible deal by talking about this long-term commitment to the Ukrainian army. Well, of course, the Russians aren't going to settle that. What? Oh, so you're going to have a long-term commitment to arming Ukraine, a long-term commitment to continue building your military infrastructure in Ukraine, and you
Yeah.
expect us to settle for this?
Yeah, well, then the Russians would say, well, we didn't have any intention of going to Kiev, but I guess we have no choice now.
Well, yeah, well, that's right. In those circumstances, yeah, absolutely. Um, it will also perhaps involve deploying European forces. These would not go to fight today. They would not go to fight on the front line, but would be there, on the contrary, once peace is signed to guarantee full respect for it. Now, Macron must take people for fools. We won't be on the front line. No, we'll be in the back line, building up our air bases, our army bases, our rocket launchers, our air defense systems, our anti-missile systems. Oh, but it'll be in the back. It won't be on the front line. So we won't be on the front line. So we're not going to be doing anything warlike. We're just building up, all
And
our
the Russians would
defense
not
systems.
dare, they
Yeah.
wouldn't dare to attack them. Really?
Yeah.
Really?
I,
You really must take people for fools.
Absolutely. I mean, you think people are just so stupid they don't see what you're doing here. Oh, we're not going to be on the front line. Oh, well, that's all right. I
Well,
mean, that's the only issue.
I have no idea what the French general staff thinks about all this. But if I were a French foot soldier, so you want me to go to this country that's at war with Russia
Right,
as bait?
right,
Am I going as bait?
right, right. Exactly. Um, and then full respect for it, starting next week, we will bring together in Paris the chiefs of staffs of the countries that wish to take responsibility in this regard. Remember, there's no peace deal. But already, starting next week, we will bring together in Paris the chiefs of staff of the countries that wish to take responsibility in this regard. They're absolutely determined somehow. How do we ensure that there can be no peace? And the Russians are turning around. Hey, look, why would we end this? What we're doing? I mean, this is what they're planning. The moment the shooting stops, they're going to immediately just carry on what they were doing in Ukraine before, turning it into an armed encampment directed at Russia. That's Macron is just saying it. That's our plan, to turn Ukraine into an aircraft carrier targeted at Russia.
And believing that your troops and other NATO troops will be there, stationed there with impunity? I mean,
Exactly. And,
I
and,
mean, this
and
is psychotic.
Russia's going to accept this. Russia's going to accept the peace. Now, I have to think that he's smart enough to know Russia, of course, won't accept it, and that's why he's doing it in order
Yes.
to ensure that there's no possible peace deal. Um, And that was this is a plan for a solid, lasting, verifiable peace that we have prepared with the Ukrainians and several European partners, and that I defended in the United States 15 days ago. And I want to believe that the United States will remain on our side, but we must be ready if this is not the case.
Well, the the people around Trump probably were expecting this, or certainly have read this, and this is a big middle finger, and they're not
Right,
going to take it well. You're gonna do everything in your power
right,
to obstruct what we're trying
right,
to do.
right,
Macron, you're on the same list as Zelensky right now.
right.
Okay.
Yeah. No,
I
that's
mean, and plus, again, a lot of things that are said in the Trump White House and people, and George and I have a lot of questions about that. But you know, Macron, you just sat in the Oval Office. You were a
yeah,
guest,
right,
and this is your
right,
reaction
right.
to
No,
to the
exactly.
gracious visit that you were accorded. Really?
That's right.
You look
That's
like
right.
like a juvenile delinquent.
Right.
You know,
No,
there's
that's right. You're absolutely right because Trump said this several times, both to Macron and to Starmer, that this talk about security guarantees that comes at the end. First of all, you have to actually come up with a deal that they sign on to. Then we can start talking about how do we implement this. You can't just simply start talking about putting boots on the ground before there's any sort of a deal. And he knows this. He knows that that's what Trump said this. He said this several times, even when Macron was there, and that he's continuing with this talk, ignoring the American position. And then here, whether peace in Ukraine is achieved quickly or not, European states must, given the Russian threat that I've just described to you, be able to defend themselves better and deter any new aggression. Yes, whatever happens, we must equip ourselves better, raise our defense position, and this for the sake of peace itself to deter. In this respect, we remain attached to NATO and our partnership with the United States, but we must do more to strengthen our independence in terms of defense and security. The future of Europe does not have to be decided in Washington or Moscow. So this is his posturing. He's now doing the Gaullist, channeling
yeah,
his inner Gaullism.
he's channeling his inner de Gaulle. Yeah.
That's right. And yes, the threat is returning to the east, and the innocence, so to speak, of the last 30 years since the fall of the Berlin Wall is now over. So we'll come to the Russian response, but they took particular umbrage at that remark about the threat. I guess he means returning from the east. I think the Russians felt very, very strongly about that, understandably. Anyway, then this is where it gets very interesting. He says, though in this time of action that is fully beginning, France has a special status. We have the most effective army in Europe, and thanks to the choices made by our elders after the Second World War, we are equipped with nuclear deterrence capabilities. This protects us as much more than many of our neighbors. In addition, we did not wait for the invasion of Ukraine to note a worrying world. And though the two military programming laws that I've decided and the successive parliaments voted on, we will have doubled our armed forces budget in almost 10 years. And then, this is where it gets really interesting. It says, our nuclear deterrent protects us. It is complete sovereign French from start to finish. Since 1964, it has always explicitly played a role in preserving peace and security in Europe. But in response to the historic call of the future German Chancellor, I have decided to open the strategic debate on the protection of our allies on the European continent through our deterrent. Whatever happens, the decision has always been and will remain in the hands of the President of the Republic, head of the armed forces. So this is where he's offering to his nuclear forces. So he's planning a major change in French nuclear strategy, where France's nuclear weapons were a weapon of last resort only when France itself was under threat. He's now going to extend it to Europe. I don't think the Germans are going to go for it. Whenever there's been talk along those lines, the Germans have never been interested in, having the French take care of their security. That's just they don't think much of the French. They've never had a particularly high opinion of the French. They're not going to allow the French to be their nuclear guarantor.
Yeah, well, this is just this is making everyone more vulnerable. I mean, this is just madness.
Right,
And why are you bringing up nuclear weapons?
right,
You're
exactly.
the ones that are bringing it up.
That's right, exactly,
And
exactly.
and how is Russia? We've been over this already, but I mean, he makes it sound like, they're pulling out the nuclear codes and they're on, on
That's right.
standby launch. This isn't madness. This is
Right.
madness.
Yes. Yeah. It is. So this was the statement from the Russian foreign minister. So there was a statement from the Russian foreign minister, and there was also a statement separately from Lavrov himself. And so here the foreign ministry says, on the eve of the EU summit dedicated to the crisis around Ukraine and the confrontation with Russia, French President Macron, clearly trying to set the tone for the upcoming meeting, made an extremely aggressive anti-Russian speech, having once again called our country a threat to France and to Europe. He accused it, as usual, without any evidence, of all mortal sins, from cyber attacks and interference in elections and the desire to almost attack other European states. Yeah, without any evidence. I like the way they put it, without it. That's the way the fact checkers these days write. Oh, without any evidence. Putin said, without any evidence. And as goes on,
Touche,
yes,
touche.
exactly. The French president convinces his own citizens of the existence of an imaginary existential threat from Russia. In fact, Russia has never threatened France, but on the contrary, helped it defend its independence and sovereignty in two world wars.
Ouch.
That's a very interesting point because, the First World War, they took the brunt. They took a huge brunt from the Germans in order to relieve the pressure on France on the Western Front. Almost certainly it saved France. It was the Germans were not able to throw all their weight against Paris in September 1914 because they still had to fight on the Eastern Front at Tannenberg. That saved France. That was a miracle that Paris was saved. So the Russians did save France in the First World War, and in the Second World War, Russia never had to do anything for France. It chose to do so. They basically allowed France to take part at Yalta, allowed France to become a permanent member of the UN Security Council, allowed France to have its own zone of occupation in Germany. Stalin could have said no to all of that. He owed nothing to France. France hadn't done anything for the Soviet Union. So really, you're gonna bring up, that all the things that Russia had done against you. Who invaded Russia? Now let me think. Could it have been General Bonaparte? I mean, I don't know. I don't know. I don't remember Russia invading France. It was General Bonaparte who led a massive invasion of Russia. Um, Emmanuel Macron's statements are, in fact, a threat to Russia. The French leader appeals to the foreign policy traditions of his country, but his theses run counter to these traditions, to the ideological legacy of Gaullism. He cannot help but know that France's authority in the international arena has been based for decades on the desire of his predecessors to play a balancing role in world affairs, to make a feasible contribution to reducing tensions with Russia and the West. At one time, it was Charles de Gaulle who put forward the concept of indivisible security from the Atlantic to the Urals, based on the development of consensus and taking into account the opinions and interests of all states on the continent.
I've never heard such a better description of Gaullism.
Right,
That's really, really
right.
good.
That's right.
Really.
That's right. Today, we are witnessing a break between official Paris and these fundamental principles of French foreign policy. Notice how much more polite the tone of the Russians is than the tone of Macron. I think they're being over polite, but nonetheless, it's almost like an academic
Yeah.
conversation, the citing history as opposed to Macron's vituperations.
Yeah, I've asked a number of my Russian friends, including Dima Babich, which all of our viewers know. I've asked them about this repeatedly, and his explanation, it's not very good even by his account. He said, but when you're hysterical, you look weak.
Yes.
If you're pragmatic and you're measured, you get more respect. And I think
Yep.
probably that's it.
Yep. Yep. What path to peace does the French leader propose? The recipes are the same: further pumping Ukraine with Western weapons and continuing military actions, an unprecedented increase in military spending by European, NATO, and EU member states. In this context, accusations against Russia of increasing military appropriations and the number of armed forces seem absurd. After all, the combined military budget of NATO countries is twice as large as the defense spending of all other countries in the world, and the military budget of EU states is several times larger than Russia's defense spending. It should also be emphasized that Russian military construction program is a forced reaction to NATO's aggressive policy, including the forced entry of Sweden and Finland into the alliance. Neighbors of Russia, incidentally. They border Russia. As for the ideas promoted by Emmanuel Macron of deploying Western military contingents on Ukrainian territory under the guise of peacekeeping forces, we have repeatedly stated this is unacceptable. Such an occupation of Ukraine would inevitably lead to an extremely dangerous escalation. And then in Macron's speech, there are clear notes of nuclear blackmail. Yeah, we kind of detected that. Paris's ambitions to become the nuclear patron of all of Europe, providing it with its nuclear umbrella almost to replace the American one, have burst out into the open. Needless to say, this will not lead to strengthening the security of either France itself or its allies. In addition, the potential of the French nuclear forces is incomparable with the United States. France has only 56 units of nuclear warhead carriers, while the United States has 898. The total capacity of the nuclear component of the French armed forces is 67.2 megatons, while the American is 1814 megatons. And then he goes on. This is Lavrov, who also.
Well, it's real quick here, George. I mean,
Yeah.
we've talked about the debate of how deterrence works,
Right.
mutual assured destruction. But what Macron is doing is saying, no, look at us, look at
Right.
us,
Right.
focus on us.
Right.
That is so counterintuitive what you would want to do,
Right.
because we have nuclear weapons to protect our sovereignty. Everyone understands that, and that's why it is acceptable, air quotes there, because the French are going to be responsible with that. You want to spread it out, then we don't even know what terms and conditions in
No,
which you would use them. I
absolutely.
mean, and that turns into a nightmare
That's right.
because
Exactly.
nuclear strategists, that's why we have mass assured destruction. Both sides understands the equation, the logic of it, okay?
Right.
The logic of insanity in a way. But Macron just bursts it out and sprinkles it everywhere.
Right.
That is so irresponsible.
Right. Exactly. And I again, as with we were talking about, the German rearmament. I have grave doubts that the German public would go for it. I don't think the French public is going to go for this. I mean, they've been committed to this nuclear doctrine. We only have this. Our nuclear weapons are purely for our own security. We don't use it in any other context. So I don't think, and even if you're going to try and bring in the British are not going to go for it and say, hey, seriously, we're going to risk getting attacked, and because we're going to fight, extend our nuclear umbrella to Lithuania, we're ready to, have London taken out for Lithuania. The British are not going to go for it. I mean, this is just absolute empty bluster.
Well, then let's a scenario which is an incredible one, but I'll mention it. So the French and the Russians get into some kind of crisis, and because the nuclear umbrella covers Germany and Italy, well, they become targets because Russia and France are having a tiff. I mean, the Germans say, we're not.
Right.
Wait.
Right. No, that's right. Because France is such a limited nuclear power, ultimately, they may well be vulnerable to a first strike. I'm not saying Russia would be thinking, but Russia may well be thinking about, hey, we could, France is threatening its nuclear weapons, in which case, we can take out their entire nuclear capability, which they never could with the United States. That's why you had mutually assured destruction, because neither side had a first strike capability. So even if you launch a preemptive attack, you will never be able to take out all of the nuclear weapons. But when you're a small nuclear power, then there's a pretty decent chance that you can take out pretty much everything that they have. So that's why it's kind of dangerous
Well,
to start talking
that
like
is
that.
the but that's the rationale, and a reasonable one is that France should have just disarmed. It should have just gotten rid of them for the reasons that George just said. I
Sure.
mean, you need 2,000.
Right,
If you have 300, there's no reason to have it. If you have
right,
2,000, then you
right,
become a major target.
right.
Okay, that's why the logic of this
Yes,
it infuriates me.
that's
Okay,
right.
because it's
Yes,
more national pride. Is that what it's? It has nothing to
right.
do with security.
Right. No, it's exactly. Anyway, here was Lavrov, and the question is a question to Lavrov at a news conference. He said, yesterday evening, President Macron said in his address to the nation that Russia has become a threat to France and to all of Europe. He also noted that it was worth starting discussions about the use of nuclear weapons by this country to protect the entire European Union. How do you assess Macron's statement about the threat from Russia, and how dangerous do you think nuclear rhetoric is in general? Can these words of the French president be considered a threat to our country? And then Lavrov says, well, of course, this is a threat to Russia. If we consider the threat, they call a meeting of the chiefs of general staff of European countries and Britain. They say it is necessary to use nuclear weapons to prepare to use nuclear weapons against Russia. This is a threat. Unlike his predecessors, who also wanted to fight against Russia, Napoleon, Hitler, Mr. Macron is not acting very gracefully, because they said directly, we must conquer Russia, we must defeat it. He apparently wants the same thing, but for some reason he says that we must fight Russia so that it does not defeat France, that our country creates threats to France and Europe. So then it says, it was strange for me to hear Mr. Macron in an aggressive manner continuing the work of Napoleon, who wanted to conquer Russia, making his true illusory intentions, there was no need to explain here, began to speak out and criticize President Putin for constantly deceiving, thus as if entering into a correspondence dialogue with President Trump. He clearly stated that everything he agreed on with with Putin was always fulfilled. That's he being Trump. Trump said Putin never broke his word with me. So I think that's what Lavrov is referring to here. The president of France, Emmanuel Macron, decided to follow the path of Zelensky, who, while in the Oval Office, did not hesitate to lie, mentioning that Putin broke some agreements 25 times. This is said by a man who came to power on the slogans of establishing peace, fulfilling the Minsk agreements. Then he began to declare that he would never fulfill them. And then Macron said that Putin constantly violated everything that was discussed. In particular, it turns out that this accusation of his also concerns the meeting in Paris. In December 2019, the president of France held a summit of the Normandy Four with the participation of Macron himself, Merkel, and Putin and Zelensky. In December 2019, it was dedicated, as the French and Germans announced, to the task of saving the Minsk agreements. And then we were preparing for this event in December 2019 in the Elysee Palace at the expert level, at the ministerial levels. We fully agreed on the final documents of this meeting by consensus. The first point of the document stated that we were agreeing on the need to withdraw troops from the contact line along its entire length. The document was agreed upon when the leaders had already sat down and were given what the experts and ministers had agreed upon. Zelensky said that he would not agree to this. He would not withdraw troops along the entire contact line because then it would become a border forever. This was his attitude to the Minsk agreements. He said that he could only agree to disengage troops at 3 points on the contact line. The Ukrainian representatives pointed to them. We had to agree, although both Macron and Merkel were unpleasantly surprised. But this character's ability to take advantage of hospitality in his own way is well known. So he's getting into the details of this of what happened in that meeting in Paris. And I would like to add, in retrospect, that nothing was done at any of these points that Zelensky himself indicated as places where it would be possible to withdraw forces from the contact line. The Ukrainians thwarted this agreement. The political part of this document, adopted in Paris, confirmed what was written in the Minsk agreements, the need to legislatively enshrine the special status of the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics by making the corresponding amendments to the Constitution. This was written down. Within a few days, it became clear that Zelensky was not going to do anything. Footage is available of how, following the December 2019 summit in Paris, when the four leaders were sitting at the same table at a press conference, Zelensky was seen clowning around, making faces during Putin's speech, thereby showing his attitude to the document that had just been signed. That's actually available on YouTube, where he's making faces while Putin is speaking. And then now, in his elated speeches, he claims that Russia has not implemented the Paris agreements. It turns out that Chancellor Merkel and Emmanuel Macron spoke in Paris in 2019 about the need for the summit to save the Minsk agreements. And that was also a lie, because after that summit, both French President Hollande, who signed the Minsk agreements, and German Chancellor Merkel herself said that they were not going to implement anything. They needed to buy time to pump up Ukraine with weapons. So she was lying when she called for saving the Minsk agreements.
In her own words, in her own words.
That's right. And then question, Europe is discussing the idea of sending peacekeepers to Ukraine. Is Moscow still against it, or is there room for compromise? Lavrov, we see no room for compromise. The discussion is being conducted with an openly hostile purpose. Yes. They do not hide why they need this. French President Macron, with the support of British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, will soon take Zelensky to bow to Washington. According to their plan, military actions must be suspended for a month, at least in the air, sea, and in relation to energy facilities. And during this time, these troops must be deployed in parallel with the agreement on peace terms. So that's something new. That I haven't heard that claim being made. That's why they're suggesting this 1 month moratorium on attacks, on missile attacks. They're going to use that time to deploy their troops in Ukraine. That seems to be what Lavrov is saying. What the British and French are planning. At least
that's how the Russians are interpreting it. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So that's that. I haven't heard that particular interpretation.
You know, everybody. I'm glad George brought that up, because I have to say, in all honesty, and it pains me to say this, because Georgia and I have invested a lot of time in this. It's just hard to take any of this serious from these people. You know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, I feel like we're parsing words from a word salad.
Yes.
I mean, where is the real meaning? There must be real meaning.
No, there's not. No, that's right. That's right. That's right. Yeah. And then we will consider the presence of these troops on Ukrainian territory in the same way as we consider the potential presence of NATO in Ukraine. No matter what flags this operation is covered with, EU flag, national flags of all the countries supplying the contingents, no matter what chevrons, even banderas, are pasted on the sleeves of the uniform, these will still be troops of NATO countries. For some reason, the Irish have already expressed their readiness to send their contingent. They can't wait to be outside the North Atlantic Alliance. Canada, where would they be without it? Australia, an interesting company is gathering. So,
and people say Lavrov doesn't have a sense of humor.
Yeah, the Irish. I mean, I love the island.
Yeah, I don't get that at all.
I don't. They've been. Yeah, no, I don't. Ireland is a sort of a strange country. It's become very strange. I mean, it used to have a definite identity. You kind of Ireland was very predictable. Never wanted to have anything to do with NATO. Now it seems to have drawn very much into the whole British NATO orbit.
It's this elite capture. George and I
I
have
think
talked
so.
about it so many
Yeah,
times.
that's right. Yeah, yeah. Um, And we will absolutely not simply watch such actions. I want to say once again that this will mean not the allegedly hybrid, but direct, official, undisguised involvement of NATO countries in the war against the Russian Federation. This cannot be allowed, especially against the backdrop of yesterday's nervous statement by French President Macron that Russia is a threat to Europe. If this is so, then troops must be sent against this threat. No, that's exactly right. If you start talking along these lines about the great threat from Russia, then Russia's not going to tolerate. You obviously have hostile intent, and therefore, why would Russia tolerate the presence of hostile forces right on its borders? I think that's it. Yeah. So that's the very strong Russian response to Macron's extraordinary address to the French nation. Again, as the Russians pointed out, it's miles and miles away from the way de Gaulle spoke. And let's remember, de Gaulle was speaking about the friendship with the Soviet Union at the height of the Cold War. This was the 1960s. This was after Hungary. This was at the time of the Czechoslovak crisis, and he was talking about Europe from the Atlantic to the Urals. When you could say, well, Soviet Union, there may be a Soviet threat. He was speaking. That's the way he was speaking, and now Macron just making all this stuff up, and is now putting together a coalition of the willing to send them into Ukraine. How the hell are the Russians going to react to this? Well, we've seen how Lavrov reacted.
Why does he feel the absolute need to be leading the parade on this?
Right,
This is where the wind is blowing, so I might as well get in first in line, or maybe because of the absolute political paralysis in
right,
domestic French politics, which is going nowhere.
right,
His days are numbered. He's very unpopular. At least he gets a hug from Zelensky and the European leaders
right,
because no one will touch him with a touch.
right,
While standing on a foot ladder with a 10-foot pole in
right.
France, he's very unpopular.
Very
Um,
unpopular. Yeah,
and in all of these things, George, again, this is just this reification of the post-war era and the Second World War itself, is everybody is posturing for my
right,
Churchill moment,
right,
my legacy here. I'm going to be remembered for this. Okay. And it is so short-sighted. I mean, I seriously don't, I could be wrong because I didn't know these people. But I don't think Franklin Delano Roosevelt, I don't think he spent much time on his legacy. I don't think Churchill spent much time on his legacy. He was a pretty busy man, okay? I don't think Stalin did either. Okay, after everything was said and done, yeah, maybe, of course. They wrote memoirs and stuff like that, at least Churchill did. Um, but I mean, this is just, I want to be the great European influencer. Is this,
right. Yeah. No, I think so. But it's also interesting when you think about, yes, he is, talking about this kind of Second World War, but he doesn't speak about the more obvious historical analogy, which the Russians think about, General Bonaparte, because that's our experience. With when France was this hostile to us, because traditionally, for quite a long time, France and Russia have had good terms. On the same side in two world wars. There was, France had maintained good relations. There's always been a kind of France and Russia united against Germany. So this is something new, and therefore it goes back to a previous time when Napoleon decided to crush Russia once and for all. And it turned into a total catastrophe, as did Hitler's invasion. It was a catastrophe in Napoleon. It basically ended his rule. His Grande Armée was destroyed in Russia. And 1814, Tsar Alexander I, rode into Paris, as triumphant. So he obviously doesn't want to go there. I mean, that brings up painful memories for France. but the Russians do. And say, well, this is a different France. This isn't the France
Well,
we're
I mean,
used to dealing with.
it kind of begs the question, George, is that all of these like low octane leaders in Europe, do they just think that this is they're bluffing Trump, that
Right,
the Americans will come in anyway? I mean,
right,
the deep state or
right.
administrative, they'll force him to do it. I mean, they'll threaten to impeach him. We're gonna snooker this guy. We're gonna outwit this guy. Do you think that's a part of this?
Yes, I think so. I think, it used to be the case that the Americans would sabotage any kind of European peace initiatives, like, in the Balkans. The Europeans would come up with a plan to end the wars in Bosnia and Herzegovina or in Kosovo, and the Americans would absolutely squelch it. So, nope, that's it. And that was quite effective. But now it's been reversed. It's now the Americans who are putting forward some way to bring this fighting to an end, and the Europeans are determined to thwart it. Now, the Americans succeeded. They were determined to end any possible peace plans, and they succeeded. I don't know whether the Europeans will succeed, but that's without question. That's what they're trying to do. All of them,
Well, no,
Starmer, Macron, they're absolutely determined to do this.
I'm absolutely certain they're going to fail. I just find it interesting to what degree they're going to fail,
Right.
okay? Because Trump sees the world in a very, very different way, okay? As it was pointed out, I think it was Patrick Henningsen, and it was a very interesting observation. He said to me, because I was bringing up the idea of Yalta 2.0, and he said, it's exactly that. And think of Yalta in your mind, everybody. The leaders sitting there. There's not going to be a British one. There's not going to be a French one. There's going to be a Russian one. There's going to be an American one, maybe a Chinese one, and it's reordering the world. Now that reordering can be quite brutal. Okay, I mean we're going to take the Panama Canal. We're taking Greenland. I mean great power politics. It has a logic to it, and sometimes a very compelling one because it's designed where great powers never fight each other. You can fight on the periphery all you want, okay, but you don't go head to head. That's a recipe for disaster. And Trump seems to be kind of thinking in those terms,
Yeah,
okay?
he's thinking along those lines. However, it's going to be very, very difficult to come
Yes.
to an agreement on Ukraine, and I think that's where the problem. I mean, before you get to Yalta, you're going to have to deal with this the problem in Ukraine. As things stand, the American plan, which is the ceasefire, I think that's just a non-starter, and it is a non-starter in many ways, in large part because of the European determination to use any ceasefire to in order to bring its forces in, and so therefore it actually ensures that there can be no peace plan. So I think that's where it's going to be
Well,
really
what do you think?
difficult how we can
Again,
get to a Yalta 2.0.
another question. We saw, I guess it's now like 2 weeks ago, Trump threatening these tariffs on Mexico and Canada. And you and I discussed it because we need better border control. We're fighting fentanyl.
Right.
And lo and behold, the Mexicans and the Canadians, they did kind of mobilize their border police and agencies. And and then, and now it's back on again. But it's interesting, the more that the Europeans block Trump and his plans, whatever they may be, I think that Trump is going to say, okay, no French cognac in America again. Okay, he's going to go down that path. He's going to increase the pain. Okay, because you guys can have all your highfalutin ideas about Ukraine's place in Europe and NATO is the greatest defensive alliance and hit all those bumper stickers. And Trump will just turn around and hit him really where it hurts. Okay. I think that's still a possibility. My overall thesis here, and maybe this is where George and I disagree, is that at the end of the day, the Europeans are not going to have a say in this. I don't know what the end game is. I'm honest with everybody, but I don't think the Europeans are going to play a role in it. That's my feeling.
Well, that's a possibility. The problem here is that I think the Americans themselves are in two minds. I mean, as to how they're going to
I
handle
agree.
Ukraine. They sort of say, yeah, we got to end it, but they haven't really thought through under what circumstances are you prepared to end this? And if that's the case, then the Europeans could still worm their way in and ensure that nothing really happens. There's no. I mean, I think the important thing is still, which what I believe, which is that no one's going anywhere in NATO. They're going to keep this NATO thing going. I mean, it's too good for everybody, and I think we can easily just get sidetracked by all this posturing by Annalena Baerbock and Ursula von der Leyen and Macron. Is, oh yeah, America and Europe, they're going their different ways. I don't think it's going to happen. I think there's just too much linking them together. How that's going to play out in Ukraine, I don't know. It's going to be very difficult. But I somehow still think ultimately America and Europe are going to stick together. It's the consequences, I think, just too huge for both countries, for both entities.
Well, George, considering everything that's been happening in the first month of the Trump administration, you may be right, you may be wrong, but for sure, at this point in time, nobody knows the
Nobody knows.
answer
No, I think
at
that's
this
right.
point.
Yeah, exactly.
Food for thought. All right,
Very much so.
folks, this is George and I wrapping up our Friday podcasts. There are two of them. This one we did on France, and then we did with the multiple meetings of the Europeans with their hair on fire.
Yes.
Okay. Everyone, I don't want to shock anyone, but did you know that Europe and in Russia are at war? I don't know if you heard, but
That's right.
that's what we're being
That's right.
told.
And it's
Okay.
an existential threat, right? Europe is under an existential threat from Russia.
And they're going to spend somebody else's money.
Yes, of course. Of
All
course.
right, everybody. This is a Gaggle with Peter and George. We're on Locals, so please go to thegaggle.locals.com. Like I said, this is Friday. We'll reconvene on Sunday, and we have live stream on Monday, and then George goes solo on Tuesday.
Tuesday. So, and then we got to think about these dogs and how stressed they are. You think the Europeans are stressed. The dogs are really stressed. You go, hey, never mind, NATO and whatever. What's happening with the tip jar? They're getting tired with doing all the heavy lifting and not getting rewarded for it. So, if you have a few bob in your pocket, you got anything, under the sofa cushions, anything, whip them out into the tip jar. We're very grateful for all of your help and friendship and support. The more you're able to donate, the more of these videos we can make, the more we can improve on the technology. And above all, we're going to be able to handle these dogs, which are getting more and more frustrating. So remember, if you like the gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye bye.